Good evening, everybody, and apologies for our slightly late start this evening. We are delighted to have you with us for what I know is going to be an amazing conversation. So welcome, everybody. The format of these events, for those of you who haven't joined us before, is that we have a conversation and then we start taking questions from the floor. I noticed that there are some hands already raised, which is exciting. And then we record this conversation and edit it into a podcast, so you can share it with friends afterwards, and anyone who has missed the event will get a chance still to hear what we talk about. So it gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce Jackie Weaver, who was catapulted to fame for that video of Handforth Parish Council and her extraordinary achievement of making local politics interesting to everyone. In a moment, we are going to be joined by another high profile and wonderful star of local politics, Magid. He's just in an urgent meeting and he will join us in about 15 minutes. So I hope it's all right, Jackie, if I start with you. And you shot to fame, you were a household name. How did that feel?
Well, thank you, Jennifer. I mean, it's a reasonable question. I'm still trying to work out what the answer is. I guess I have been so busy since the beginning of February that I haven't really had time to sit back and take stock of it. But I guess that my overall kind of impression is just it's been such a wonderfully positive experience. I've met so many nice people. And what is absolutely amazing is people who are actually interested in town and parish councils. Where have you been all my life?
Wonderful. And I will take this opportunity. I'm sure you must be exhausted about talking about that meeting, but while we're waiting for Magid to join us, if you don't mind, because I know so many of our audience are going to be curious about how you found yourself in that position in the first place. What were the circumstances in which you were called in to take that meeting?
Yeah, my day job is I'm the chief officer, that sounds terribly grand, of the Cheshire Association of Local Councils. And we're a support organisation. There's 46 others of us, if you like, across the country in all the old Shire counties. And our role is to provide training, advice, guidance, anything that our local councils need. So when Handforth found itself without a clerk to manage a meeting, they got in touch and asked if we would field someone to clerk the meeting. And knowing that they had had problems in the past, I mean, clearly, you know, an event like you saw that night doesn't blow up in 3 minutes. I felt that it would be wrong of me.
Relieved to hear that. There were warning signs.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I mean, I definitely went into it feeling that there was going to be challenge. I knew it was going to be a challenging meeting, but I certainly didn't expect it to have the level of hostility that we saw that night. So yeah, that was why I was there, literally to facilitate the meeting.
And how do you feel now about how you handled it? Obviously, many of us in the country see you as a hero for how you handled it. Was it clear to you during the process that what you did, turning off the video, was in fact the right thing to do? Do you have any regrets? Are you pleased with how you handled it?
I've kind of come full circle. I certainly on the night felt absolutely justified in what I did. Absolutely no question about it. I always feel very much for the underdog. And there are 3 very quiet councillors out of the 6 who had taken all the right steps in order to have a meeting that night. And that hadn't been easy for them to arrange because they had to get past the chairman, met the chairman. And the chairman had already had unilaterally declared himself clerk while suspending the actual clerk. So they'd done everything right. They'd followed procedure, like procedures, and they had, two councillors had called the meeting. And of course, as soon as I saw the three turn up, I knew that the game plan would be shut the meeting down. And I guess at that point, I just felt so passionately about supporting the three councillors who, in my opinion, had fulfilled everything that was asked of them. They'd been patient, they'd gone through the procedure, and they were now all they were wanting to do was hold an ordinary council meeting to discuss things like the local transport plan, I think it was, for Handforth. And I was damned if they were going to be cut off at the knees. A little later, it was questioned, and I began to question myself. I began to think, did I really do the right thing, or was there another way of doing it? And I just, in the heat of the moment, didn't see that. No, I still think I did the right thing, not least of which is whatever the regulations were, and there are no regulations that cover that specific scenario. You can't possibly have a meeting like that and allow that kind of behaviour to go ahead. You just can't. So yeah, that's what I mean about full circle, Jennifer.
And how representative of local council meetings is what happened? Obviously, it's not common, but was this a one-off isolated event, or have you seen other meetings that could have gone the same way?
I've seen other challenging meetings. I mean, by definition, you have local people talking about local things that they are passionate about, and there are going to be times when tempers get framed. I get that, but I've never seen the hostility that you saw that night.
And that meeting was very lucky to have you in the room. Are there sanctions and rules that could have been applied to deal with that situation?
Well, that's the next challenge that we have. I mean, since the introduction of the Localism Act in 2011, see, not only Councillor Tolver can quote legislation. We've had a code of conduct which brilliantly sets out the kind of behaviour that we expect of local councillors. And there is a process in place for it to be investigated if it's perceived that behaviour falls below that standard. However, there are no sanctions that can be applied. Now, the government has taken the view that actually, airing the dirty washing in public should be enough to deter any councillor. But as we saw with Handforth, there are certainly councillors that it doesn't matter how much dirty washing they wash in public, they are completely unrepentant. And unfortunately, they really do bring the sector into disrepute when you see that kind of action. And again, I feel very strongly that if we are showing a commitment to wanting to improve standards, and good grief, we've certainly been through incarnations of it from the very early Standards Board for England up to what we have now, then surely the next step, or the accompanying step really, should be sanctions that show we're serious. And by that, I'm talking about, not public flogging.
I'm relieved to hear it.
Flogging, definitely not. But I'm talking about things like mandatory training before you can attend another council meeting. And, an alternative would be that you're not able to attend council meetings for a fixed period of time, a ban. Something that shows that we are serious when we say your conduct fell below the standards approved.
So it's time for laws and sanctions to be toughened so that there is a reason for to stop that kind of behaviour.
Well, not even toughened, but just introduced.
I'm just going to I want to move on to the wider culture in local politics, but I'm going to hang on to that until Magid appears. So I've got a couple of questions already from the floor that I can ask you from Mark Crossley. Has your profile been raised since your interview with Piers Morgan, and if so, how?
I'm not sure about that, and I'm still getting over the comparison with Emily Pankhurst. I don't know if he thinks I was actually around during those days or not. I mean, at the end of the day, all of us in the sector, I don't just mean Jackie Weaver, we've been trying for many, many years to get the media to take an interest in our tier of local government with pretty much no success whatsoever. And this year, I actually have journalists and TV ringing me up saying, come and talk to us about parish council elections. I mean, that's amazing.
And how much of the problem with conduct within meetings is to do with who is attracted to serve on a parish council, who is able to serve on a parish council? I ask that specifically because we have a question here on the chat about how do we attract dynamic youth into council meetings and into taking on roles, given the issues of climate change, which obviously affect their future.
I mean,
Magid, welcome.
Hello, guys. So lovely to see you guys again. Jennifer, the last time I saw you was at Jesus College in Oxford.
I know. Can you believe it? That's right. That was our opening conference for our launch event for Compassion in Politics. We were actually in All Souls College, and the masters said how much they loved seeing us plotting political revolution within the confines of their hallowed college. So it's lovely to have you back with us. We were just talking about Jackie's sudden propulsion to fame.
Of course.
And a couple of people in the audience have asked whether she would consider now becoming a politician herself.
And how did you respond, Jackie? Or were you about to respond? Sorry.
About to respond. Oh.
No. One of the problems I find, and again, I've been a counsellor and decided it wasn't for me. I guess that one of the things I find that must be really challenging about being a politician is that they usually have to have party politics involved there somewhere. And when it comes to party politics, and again, it's a personal opinion, and I may be way off the mark, but it seems like you no longer are your own person. That there is, you may still have all the same passions that you stood for when you stood for election, but then the party has a view, and it's like the party view kind of smothers you, maybe.
Can I just come in on that, Jennifer?
Please.
I completely understand where you're coming from, Jackie, because you do get many people that say, oh, they should get rid of party politics when it comes to local councils and stuff. I think even if we were to get rid of party politics, people would organize in some way. So even though it may not necessarily be like the party politics, there'll be groupings of some sort, basically. But I'll be honest with you, like, you're 100% right. And for me, one of the reasons, I guess, that appealed to me in terms of being a Green party member, also being a Green council, is that we didn't have a whip. Because you do often see, like, even especially like you hear it like from men within the Labour Party, even Conservative, Liberal, but I know more about the Labour Party with some friends and just my experience in Sheffield. But even as a candidate, they have to sign a letter saying that they won't break the whip if they do get selected if they do become a councillor. So even before, so they have to agree to all these kind of things. And it just kind of like, and you do see in many occasions where you're there basically being you're representing the ward that elected you fundamentally. They are your boss, not the leader of the council or anybody else kind of thing. They elected you kind of thing. But you do see in many occasions where a councillor is not reflecting the wishes and responsibility of if it's ward members, but it's also just has to follow the whip kind of thing. And then you kind of you observe it and you kind of feel, well, why aren't they doing it? But then it's like, there's repercussions, as you know, Jackie, for what you call it, councillors that don't kind of follow the whip kind of thing. And of course, they kind of signed this contract before. And so it is difficult. So I can understand why, I guess, you wouldn't kind of want to do that. But for me, it was just with the Greens, it's like, but then people can argue, well, Magid, the Greens aren't big enough to have whip. So if you were running the council, you would have to have, how do you keep people in check and in line kind of thing? I don't know what the answer is, but it's like, to be fair, I don't know how they do it in Brighton, where the Greens control the council there. but it is an issue for a lot of people. And just very briefly, in Sheffield, like at the moment we've got a referendum happening, which I think is the largest referendum to trigger the council to kind of just change the way the council runs, basically. So currently we've got a strong leader model, basically meaning that it's the leader of the council that basically decides everything. She decides the cabinet, and then the cabinet, they basically run the show. So the council's been forced to have a referendum to kind of change it to a committee style system. So I guess to try to overcome some of the problems of just local politics.
Magid, can I just introduce you, because I haven't introduced you?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure everyone.
I feel like you don't need to
already
introduce
knows
me exactly.
who you are,
but yeah.
But in case people don't know,
It's me. Okay.
you are Magid, and you have done many things already in your political life. You're an activist and a politician. You've been a Green Party councillor. You've been a deputy Lord Mayor. You have been the Lord Mayor of Sheffield. And you have also just started a new organisation called the Union of Justice. And I just wondered, just for context, whether you can tell us about the Union for Justice.
Yeah, and despite it being very, very short, I was also an MEP.
Oh my goodness, I left that out. Sorry, I thought I could remember it all. You were an MEP.
That's fine.
So you've worked at many of the levels of government, and you've seen it. In a minute, we're going to come on to the culture and the environment and what we can do to improve that.
Yeah.
One of the issues that presumably needs to be improved is representation of people of colour. And you have now started an organisation.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into representation generally later on, but Union of Justice is basically an independent, people of colour led an organisation that's dedicated to climate and racial justice. So we're a European organisation basically. So and we basically just tend to focus on a lot of that. We do three things basically. One of them is kind of empower. So we're kind of like building a coalition of grassroots activists and organisations that look at the intersection between climate and race across Europe. And we're also we do a lot of influence, a lot of policy work, working with mainly kind of the EU institutions. And we also kind of put on campaigns, but it is just to kind of highlight the fact that we can't talk about the climate crisis without recognizing that it is also an inequality and race issue. And I think one of the main things that we're trying to do with Union of Justice is to kind of bring forth and basically put the people who are on the front line of the climate crisis at the heart of the conversation, which are often neglected and excluded, even from whether that be climate, environment organizations to politics, so just in general when we talk about the climate discourse. So it's that's what we're trying to address. Yes, we've only been going for a month now, but it's been an amazing reaction. We've been doing some amazing stuff.
And so if we segue from that into the question of representation, how well represented is the community that local councillors and local politicians serve? By the people, how representative are councillors of the communities that they serve? Yeah,
I think if we look at local government to national government, the people that we elect to be our leaders definitely do not reflect the people that they're there to kind of represent. And of course, you can look at the government cabinet as an example. But even from a local perspective, it's honestly a lot of the time it's when it comes to representation. Of course, it's really, really important. But I'm not a favor of representation at all costs, basically. By that what I mean, it's just having black and brown faces in high places doesn't really necessarily solve the kind of deep inequality issues. Because the Conservative Party would be basically saying, look, we've got Sajid Javid, we've got Priti Patel, we're the most diverse cabinet in years kind of thing, very well knowing that Priti Patel will happily deport her grandparents if she had to. But it doesn't mean much kind of thing. But it's at the same time, it's really important to have people from those local communities represented in the kind of local council chamber, which we don't kind of often see. And but do you know, Jennifer, I always get taught, honestly, I always get asked, even from people saying, how can I become a councillor? How can I become an elected representative? And there's no clear-cut answer because there's no fair system in becoming a councillor. Each political party has got its own kind of ecosystems, and you kind of have to manipulate around, kind of get to. But it's like political parties have got responsibility. Also, like it's in everyone's interest and benefit for council, for local, for policy in general to be democratic, also to serve the interests of the people. It has to reflect the people that it represents. So it's in all our interest. And yeah, for me, it was I came basically just like I was involved in my local community to save the local library from closing. That was the first thing I was involved in. But also I was doing lots of interpreting, filling out forms and stuff like that. And then it was like nobody asked me if I wanted to be a councillor. It was me finding out. I was like, well, who makes the decisions? Like, and then realizing I just couldn't keep on asking the wrong people to do the right thing. So I was like, well, I'm going to just try and put my see what I can do. But also there is people, councillors and stuff, put a lot of barriers. And I'm talking about, I'll just close it down. But one thing I would say is like, honestly, I would say it'd be interesting to see what people in the audience think about having maximum terms as councillors. Because at times you do get certain, and of course experience and is very much needed and stuff like that. But it just does seem like a bit of a museum at times when we look at local councils, in terms of like local councils and stuff like that. And it's just, yeah, how do you kind of make sure it's kind of refreshed and that you are bringing people, so you kind of forces them to kind of go into the community and find local councillors and stuff. But yeah.
So what would your advice be to someone who feels passionately about issues and wants to become a decision maker?
And I would say if someone wants to become because we definitely need more good people. I honestly just join a political party. Of course, you can always run as an independent. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But history and data will show it's a lot more difficult to get elected. I guess it depends where you're. But honestly, what I would say is it is possible. Like if you genuinely care about and you want to make a local difference in your community, you can't do things by yourself. So gather together a team that can be family, friends, residents, build a coalition of people in your community that share the same beliefs as you want, have the same vision as you do in your ward, and just start organizing and start, and then basically just try and build a campaign from there, and kind of whether that be speak with the local, join a political party, or just do it independently. And in all honesty, but it's the thing is you can't do things by yourself. That's something I realized kind of early on. So do try and build a team together of people, and then because that's how I would basically say.
And if we can talk for a moment now about the atmosphere in politics. Obviously, we're all aware of the descent into toxicity that has happened at a national level, the levels of online abuse that those engaging in politics can expect, issues around honesty. I'm from a cross-party organisation, so I'm not going to name names, but the fact that there is nothing to ensure that politicians speak the truth, and also the way that political debate is conducted on the floor of the House itself. You know, at Compassion in Politics, we are speaking to the Committee on Standards to try and get a different approach, because on the floor of the House, people are making animal noises, booing, jeering, laughing, behaviour that wouldn't be allowed in a kindergarten or any other workplace. So how much of a problem are these issues at a local level?
That to me, Jackie?
Yeah, both of you. What's the environment like locally?
Not any better, to be honest.
What can be done to improve it?
Sorry, Jackie, go on.
I guess we don't really have the same problem as Magid's describing, because we are largely apolitical. So one of the I think one of the questions was, how do you get involved in local politics? Well, start off by going to nelt.gov.uk and look at their Make a Change campaign, and you'll see straight away there how you get involved. And it doesn't require you to decide. I mean, it's one of the things I think is really important, particularly when we're talking about young people getting involved. So you can be a young person, you can get involved with your local parish council or town council, and you get involved on the basis of I'm interested in the community. Perhaps, as Magid's saying, one of the things that got you involved into or in the visible when it comes to politics was he was actually doing something locally. People noticed what he was doing rather than just I want to be a politician. So being a town or parish council gives you that opportunity. It gives you to just show that you are doing something on behalf of the community. It gives you the opportunity to build the connections, and you can do all of that before you've decided what colour flag you want. So, whether or not you stay just doing, and I say just, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but whether or not you remain at a level where you are only doing things in your community for your community, or whether you feel able to take a step upwards, if you will, and take on candidacy for a borough, county council, or even as an MP. Again, really good grounding, being in the town or parish council. I say one of the advantages is that you don't have to worry too much about party politics. Although I think Magid also made a really important point, which was even if you don't have party politics, you will still have politics, because people do organise themselves around communities of interest. So it might be the village hall committee, as opposed to the Labour or Conservative Party. But yeah, you can still have that at local level.
And what about the tenor of debate? Personal insults, online comments?
There's two things there I'd pick up, Jennifer. I mean, one, in terms of the tenure of debate, I think the tenure of debate genuinely is much less heated. Although I do think it interesting that when we had the Standards Board for England, that was pre-2011, they actually had a ruling where they ruled that if you called a fellow councillor a stupid old, insert whatever word you like, then that was deemed, sorry, if you called a member of the public a stupid old whatever, then that was deemed to have been a breach of the code of conduct. But if you called the same to a member, another councillor, that wasn't deemed to be a breach of the code of conduct, because there was an expectation of rough and tumble in political debate, which I always thought was very interesting, because I thought if we're starting from a premise of there is a different language that you're allowed to use when you're talking to fellow councillors, and it is less polite than you would talk to a stranger, I don't think we're off to a good start.
And Magid, what's your experience been in terms of how people conduct themselves both in and outside the council chamber?
Yeah, to give it context, before I let people. So my experience of local council is Sheffield City Council, which is the third largest local authority in the country. So it's a really nice old grand and big council chamber. But it literally is a lot of jeering. Like, it's what you would see in PMQs is what kind of happens. And it's honestly really quite embarrassing. And it's like, especially like when you get, because you always hear comments when members of the public come to the gallery and they kind of come in because there's a petition or something like that. And they kind of see just the kind of, and it's honestly like a mob mentality. And I think that kind of comes from, like, I guess I'm sure it's different in every council, but I guess in the case of like Sheffield, it was like one political party that would basically dominate the kind of, and have the most. So it was kind of this kind of group mentality kind of thing. But it just didn't serve the debate. It didn't serve anything. Honestly, it was just childish and petty, and in all honesty. And it's even like, even when it kind of comes to like how do you behave outside? Because one thing that's interesting is like, it's the code of conduct for councils and local electoral it's not updated to reflect the modern times, especially when we could talk about social media, because there was many instances in Sheffield City Council where councillors would say some of the most obscene, horrific things online and on social media and stuff like that. But it just didn't, the kind of, the kind of officers that kind of dealt with that just didn't know how to kind of deal with it, because it wasn't breaking anything in terms of, so they kind of had to change certain things, but it was just hard to kind of police kind of thing. But it's honestly like, I can totally understand why people lose faith and trust in politicians, because do you remember when politicians used to resign, Jennifer? Like,
when they stood by their principles.
Yeah, but now it's just complete impunity. Like, just do what they want. Like, it's cash for honestly, it's just the current state at the moment, especially with everything, the way taxpayers' money has been used, the corruption, and like and I just, for me, just one of the things that frustrates me is that I feel like people suffer from short-term memory loss, because come the next general election or whatever, it just doesn't seem, I'm like, what will it take for people to, because think about it, even in the PMQs, this has been happening for years. So like, you say you speak with like the kind of like the committee and House of Parliament, like, but what will it take for them to change? Because like I don't necessarily think change will come from within themselves, because it's like part is so deep rooted in tradition and that kind of privilege, entitled kind of behavior. Maybe the pressure needs to come from outside kind of thing to kind of change the way kind of like, I can't help but feel that to instill compassion in politics would basically mean dismantling everything that we know in terms of like how we supposedly, even I use the word democracy with caution, because I don't think we have a democracy, but it's just, yeah, it's a real kind of task, but it's of course, and we need to tackle it from all angles, and in all honesty, but just to reinstill some trust back into politics amongst, I don't know, but you've got a lot of work, Jennifer. I don't envy you.
Yeah, but I love a challenge, as do you, Magid, and you,
Yeah.
Jackie. So I'm sure we can get there. And just to pick up on a couple of the issues, if people want to go to the Compassion in Politics website, we have a petition for a bill that would make deliberately lying and then refusing to apologise an offence. Because what happens is we have these double standards. You know, if you're in the normal course of your employment and you lie, say, to get someone to buy a car, there are legal consequences, but there are no consequences whatsoever if you dishonestly misrepresent a political situation to your own party's advantage. And that bill is now going to be brought by Plaid onto the floor of the House. So please, if you haven't signed the petition, do go onto a website or go onto change.org and find it, to stop lying in politics. And MPs are now going to get the chance to debate that. I'm sure that it won't actually lead to any deliberate change, but it does give us a chance to let politicians know that the rest of us can't get away with that behaviour, and we don't, anyone else. And the other thing that I would say is that Westminster, the mother of all democracies, has had some rather more functional children in Scotland and Wales. And I know we've got someone on the line who's from the Shetland Isles, who's part of the meeting tonight. So, you know, we can give it to other people. We can give proportional representation. We can sit in a circle. We can redesign things so that people are obliged to cooperate and collaborate, rather than end up in a binary situation with, you know, two swords lengths apart. Yet we can't apply it to Westminster. I think it's time. I think you're right. If politicians want to restore the trust that has been lost in democracy, they're going to have to start doing that.
Quick question, Jennifer. How do you know this bill? Like, it's amazing that Plaid kind of. What was the response being from the two main political parties, and Lib Dems? Like, what is that? Because I feel like Labour wouldn't support it, or because it's the same reason Labour wouldn't support proportional representation, because it serves their interest, because it always make a two-horse race. So they're hoping once they get into power, they could also kind of use and take the just abuse the liberties kind of thing. So it's yeah. So it's honestly, it's like you said, like I can't see. Just to have that debate in Parliament is an amazing achievement and in itself.
Well, it's a start, but one of the things that, sorry, I meant to be interviewing you, not giving my own.
Sorry.
I'm really sorry. No. Jackie, you're going to have to cut me off in a minute. But you know, we have seen, Marcus Rashford, the intervention of one person, how much that can change. Jackie, we've seen what you've done for local politics just through that video, and Magid the same. And then we've seen what the fans and football have managed to do within 24 hours of a plan being announced. So we are in an era where, when there is mass mobilization, authorities are having to listen. So I just want to hold the space for hope and change. And I can see that lots of people are raising their hands. Unfortunately, I don't think we have the capacity to take live questions from the floor. But shall we turn, sorry, before we turn to the questions there, you've touched on a couple of things that could be done to improve it. Magid, you've talked about the whipping system. Jackie, you've talked about binding sanctions so that codes of conduct do have consequences if they're broken. Are there any other changes at a local government level that you think could improve the situation right now?
Yeah, one thing we were trying to that literally we had to get the councillors to accept kicking and screaming, was to basically just record the public meetings and share them online, because when councillors know that they're being watched, kind of thing, behavior just tends to change a bit more. They're a bit more, even though they kind of they'll kind of get used to it after a while, but so they finally decided to do that. And that's not good enough. It's like, okay, then, well, how do we push? Now we've recorded, but how do we get that into people's hands? So one of the things, I would suggest for them that if they kind of was to partner with the local, for example, the Sheffield TV, the Nottingham TV, there's kind of local stations to kind of basically air it there, but also just to use the council's social media kind of channels, which do have a lot of kind of posts, to kind of share it on there. But it's not in there because I just feel like that would be amazing if we did that, but it's not something that's been coming with, because it kind of just does show them in a really kind of bad light, and it kind of just exposes how local politics works. But yeah, but also just engaging people and local, and just basically just people, local citizens involved kind of thing, because like I don't know how other councils kind of work it, but there's no real effort to kind of like, well, it seems that anyway, in terms of full council meetings, which I guess are the kind of like the big kind of monthly meetings where debates are had kind of thing, and depending on the structure, you can argue most of the decisions are already made before the meeting kind of starts, but of course some councils have and do have to debate things out, and the more involvement with all the, I think that the more it will kind of help change that behavior. Basically, I just kind of just reinstill a bit of faith and trust back in politics.
So a local TV equivalent of the Parliament channel, I like that. Jackie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, don't make me watch it. I do occasionally have to, not exactly adjudicate, but I have to watch council meetings for a particular purpose. And you have to admit, even the worst soap opera has got to be better than sitting watching a council meeting. Because for me, one of the most important things about parish councils particularly, but local council meetings, is that really they are only of interest to local people. One of the things I've been banging on about over the last 2 or 3 months is that I think we all have a part to play in politics, party politics or otherwise. And if you're not playing your part, don't bitch at me about it. And what I mean by that is that even if you don't want to be an officer in a council, even if you don't want to stand for election yourself, then you have a duty to at least bear witness as to what is happening. Because if you don't, then how can you say, I'm not happy with our politicians? Well, what are you doing about it? So everybody, should be involved. And I don't like the word should. It always makes me feel guilty apart from anything else. But I think it is something that really this is an appropriate word for. We should be involved. And as I say, for me, involvement is, a bit like Magid was saying, just witnessing, whether it's actually through a virtual screen or whether it's going along to a council meeting. Witness and hold to account. And that makes a change, makes a difference.
Very important point. Now I'm going to turn to some of the questions we've got in the chat. The first question I'd like to put to you is from John Sabine. Can there be a route to effective challenge of the policies of a council that's heavily dominated by one party, say 75 or 80% of the seats are held by one party, especially where local media is almost non-existent and where the elected members largely follow the whip?
Yes. Talk to Handforth. There is hope.
I guess, yeah, I think, yeah, definitely there's, I guess like it's a lot difficult, but I guess the thing is, even if there's one political party that dominates the council chamber 8%, but within that political party, it's an ecosystem itself, and there'll be different people that you can kind of get on board and stuff. But I always think like just think creatively and kind of just work with, maybe not necessarily just work with different community groups and influential groups within your local community who have got to say that those kind of councillors feel obliged to listen to. Because as well, the thing is with councillors and local councillors that want to be liked. They want to kind of be seen to be doing the kind of good thing. So even if you can't get much movement within the council chamber, you can kind of like externally kind of lean on the other kind of key stakeholders across your city, or kind of and activist groups kind of thing. But also as well, you've got like your local paper. It seems like there's a local democracy reporter in every major newspaper. You can kind of like engage with them, write in to your local paper. But yeah, there's so you may not be able to have direct, but just kind of think of it indirectly, basically.
And we have a question now from Lucy Oliver. We're in Cheshire and have a councillor that attacks people's protected characteristics, gender, race, mental health. He thrives off notoriety. How do we approach this?
Well, every 4 years you have the opportunity to stop electing him. I mean, I guess that...
4 years is a long time though, Jackie.
Yeah, but we've only got 2 left on that particular, in that particular area. Yes, it is a long time, but I often wonder when we see kind of comments like that, and I'm not calling you out on it, but what I'm saying is that, you know, it's not the first time that someone has criticised a person that has been elected. Well, how did they get elected? You know, was it because nobody was really paying any attention and nobody was involved in that council and they just left them to get on with it? And we've kind of woken up partway through the cycle because something has suddenly affected us. I don't know. But I mean, this goes back to my point about sanctions. I mean, that kind of situation, somebody who is, attacking anybody, it doesn't, I mean, in the sense that it wouldn't really matter whether it was actually racially or protected characteristics. The fact is that, you know, their behaviour with other people is inappropriate. But the only thing that will make any difference to that is us making them accountable. So simply saying to them, I'm sorry, but we feel that your behaviour has fallen below our standards, that's a good start. But unless you can follow it up with something that says, you know, therefore you're not allowed to use this platform, as in the council seat, or you must attend diversity training and be seen to have learned from it, otherwise you'll go through this loop again. Unless we're doing something like that, how can we ever expect behaviour like that to change? It's a bit like, you know, asking a turkey to vote for Christmas. I mean, you know, there is no incentive for that person to change.
Do you know?
That's not to change.
Yeah. To answer your earlier question, Jackie, is basically people, when they're looking to get elected, they don't say any horrible stuff, or they kind of come across as like, so they're on paper, on all the literature, on whatever, they'll just come across as really sound people, and then people realize what they're like once they're kind of in their kind of roles. And I just think diversity and inclusion training should be for every single person, all councillors, all kind of people that work in local authorities. But the thing is, so there's a couple of things I would do if I was in that question's position. So for example, I'd put in a complaint to the standards committee, whoever, just go down that route and just see what kind of happens. But also, it's if that person's a member of a political party, and the political party, they don't want to be seen as a racist or whatever. They don't want to be. They want no political, but wants a bad rep. So their whip would also probably be really frustrated with that person, and it's that party's whip's responsibility to kind of keep them in line. Because to give you an example, we had one councillor, a Labour councillor, who used to come and spout all sorts of nonsense online, and I literally would just go to their whip, and their whip would also share the same sentiments with me, would be as equally frustrated, would put discipline, because it brings the whole team down, their team. So I would say it's speak with their kind of their association. I don't know what political party they're from, and kind of putting complaints through there, because it's in their best interest to kind of not be seen to falling foul with the kind of electorate, the community, and whatnot. But also, I would say it's nobody likes putting together a negative campaign. But if it is really, really vital, because the thing as well is it could be that the people that elected him, his residents, and he's because we just don't know what he's like. So if people were to know he was saying all these things, then people would think twice about voting for him. And I think don't wait till the election period. I would say you can probably start a campaign just asking him to resign, And I don't know if it's the case with certain. I don't think there's any recall bills in any of the kind of local authorities that have been passed. But it's like, even if you were to petition his local and his ward that he represents, and to say like, and to kind of then to bring it forward and to go to the council meeting, because as per members of the public, you can ask direct questions whether they like it or not, and just put some pressure on that way and use the local media and to kind of just shame and embarrass him to kind of standing down, which I guess is things you could do before it comes. And all that will kind of help towards, hopefully, I don't know how long his term is, when it does come to local election, either he'll feel that he'll be too embarrassed to kind of stand, or his local party won't actually put him forward as a candidate, basically. But yeah, there's a lot of kind of pressures and stuff that you could do to kind of apply pressure on him to kind of stand down. Because the thing is, if you try putting a complaint through council, got in touch with his political party, if that's not changing and they're not willing to change, then there's other means that you can put pressure on.
I think I would say, kind of like a kindly word for his fellow councillors. The likelihood is that they are equally appalled by his behaviour, but they have absolutely nothing they can do. However, I think your points are fairly made, Magid. I would also say, if the behaviour is bad enough, then don't feel uncomfortable about calling the police.
Yes, I was wondering the same thing. If there's an incitement to racial hatred or an assault, putting a person in a sense of fear for their own physical well-being. John has also made the point here that once someone has a rosette pinned to them of a particular colour, then that party's loyal voters are going to vote for them irrespective of what their behaviour is. So that can be a further compounding problem. And I've got a question here about...
Just on that brief moment, Jennifer,
sure.
The thing is, I completely understand that point, right? Because people tend not to care too much or look into much who their councillors or who their candidates are. But the local party members of that ward have got a selection process. So even if that councillor, whoever, is absolutely terrible, when it comes to reselection, the members of that ward, of that political party, can choose to no confidence in, so he ends up not being that candidate again. So of course I appreciate that, but also it's worth looking at the party members of that ward that council represents, that really have got a lot of say and influence in terms of the selections and the reselection of candidates.
We've got a question here about citizens' assemblies. The UK Climate Assembly was amazing at the big... this is from Alexander Morris. What are your thoughts on them? Alexander asks. Citizens' assemblies, should they have a role in local government?
I guess one of the things that bothers me about things like that, and forgive me if I misunderstand, is that I think it's often very easy for people to give an opinion without any accountability. And I think we often see that in my experience, in single issue groups that come up, so that they very often lobby their local council on very local issues, but of course they only need to consider this one very local issue. That they don't have responsibility for any greater environment, or by that I mean environmental group of people. So I guess that troubles me about it. But certainly in terms of something to engage with, where you can get a better understanding of the issues and how they affect people, has to be a good thing.
Magid, your thoughts on citizens' assemblies?
Yeah, and I'm in favour of anything that kind of just gives people more of a say than they already do at the moment, and in all honesty, because I know like local councils and local authorities have consultations, which a lot of it, in my opinion, is just not a waste of time, but it just doesn't work. And it's kind of designed for them to say, well, we've consulted and the community and whatnot, and it's just a box ticking exercise that they have to do. And you can tell because they don't tend to put much effort into it. They don't actually do any. They'll put up online survey online and won't kind of push it through to certain communities, or just do the work that actually needs to be done to actually make sure that they are getting enough respondents back and stuff like that. And I think when it comes to citizens' assemblies, it's, yeah, I'm really in favour of, like, it heavily reduces corruption. It kind of empowers ordinary people in the local decision-making processes. And honestly, as well, it kind of like, because the thing as well, it's like elected representatives haven't got all the answers. Like, we need to get like certain solutions, or we need to, like, we haven't got all the answers. So hearing from people who are directly affected by other members of the community is really, really important. So yeah, I'm in favour of citizens' assemblies.
Fantastic. And another question about proportional representation. Any chance of seeing it in this country anytime soon?
Do you know, like, it's, I think I know that when you look at other countries that have got because the thing is, well, when we talk about, like, as you mentioned, like, we're the mother of democracy, it's such a farce. Like, whether that be unelected House of Lords, so our voice is just so archaic. And the Vatican State's got first past the post, and I think like one other European country, but apart from that, everyone else has got some form of proportionate representation kind of thing. And it's, I honestly just think it's so overdue kind of thing. And if we're really serious about taking back control or giving the many and not the few a real meaningful vote, and I say we need to kind of give people a meaningful vote and not having to always choose the lesser of two evils, which it always kind of seems when it comes to general elections. But the thing is, like, it's yeah, you look at the people who support proportional representation, the Greens, and I don't know if Lib Dems, I think, was it the AV, and I think Lib Dems also won it, if I'm correct, and Plaid Cymru, the SNP, Scottish Green, but it's just the two main political parties that don't want it. And why don't they want it? Because it serves them, because it'll always be a two-horse race. So why would they, like, so for them, like, it's power at all costs, basically. So I can understand for the Conservative, but one thing that baffles me is because there's been lots of studies that show that it'll be in Labour's advantage for them to support proportionate representation. Fair enough, they may not have overall control, and it definitely won't be in favour of the Conservatives, but it's just honestly, it's just greed and power that kind of just stops them. So I think, like, if we can get Labour to fully back and support proportional representation, which I know there's lots of efforts and campaigns within the Labour Party and Labour movement to kind of support that, yeah, then I reckon we'll be able to really kind of force basically the Conservatives to really support it. But it's just, I don't know how much Labour, but yeah, I guess people say we had a referendum on it in 20. That wasn't proportional representation. That was a watered down version, basically. But I just think it's inevitable. And you look at a lot of kind of like Europe, everyone's got some form, and it just seems like we're just stuck, basically. And it needs to change. And it's hopefully in my lifetime, I'd like to think, that we'll see proportional representation come through. Because just one thing on proportional representation, because one of the criticisms as well is like, but then all these far right groups will also get seats. But it is what it is. It's just more democratic. We get it. You may have some parties that you don't like, and what do you call it, getting seats. But there's a big party I don't like, the Conservative, that have got all the seats. I've got all the power at the moment. So that shouldn't be an excuse to not back or support proportional representation.
Jackie, do you think it would improve the tenor of discourse if people had to agree with each other to get things done?
I don't know whether it would or not, but I feel fairly confident that we're not very close to it at the moment. For the simple reason that Magid said. I mean, it's, whichever party is in power is hardly likely to introduce something that's going to make sure that they're not in power again. So, why would it happen?
You think like I don't know. I'm just hopeful. I agree, Jack, but I'm just hoping that at some point, I don't know. But the thing is, the question is, what will it take for Labour to back proportional representation? Like what they've lost, like in terms of like them winning a general election, of course, they haven't got Scotland anymore. So maybe they kind of have to really, I don't know. I don't know what it'll take, basically. But we'll see.
We are unfortunately coming to an end. I just thought we could finish with a point made by Emma, or a question. Do you think we should all be calling out those bad behaviours? What sort of responsibility do we have? Jackie, I know what you're going to say to this, but if I guess the final closing thought from both of you, what can we as people who care passionately about real democracy do?
I guess for me, the most important one, and I think the one that we can all get involved in, is actually bearing witness. Because I think that so much. I mean, the fact that we've been able to have virtual meetings over the last year and a bit has been extremely helpful in showing the outside world what goes on behind closed doors. And even if we're no longer, after the 8th of May, able to hold virtual meetings again, there isn't something on the telly every night. Go along to your local council meetings and watch them, because there is definitely a link between people being there watching and the behaviour of the people in those meetings.
And I would say just engage, because if you're not engaged in your local politics or whatever, then you don't know everything. You don't know what's happening. You don't know how it's negatively impacting you or anything like that. And I definitely agree. Whether that be go to your local. I remember as Lord Mayor, just to kind of bolster the interest in the local and monthly full council meetings, to get people's interest. What I did was I was like, I'm going to basically just invite, and every full council meeting as Lord Mayor, I'm going to invite a local creative person to come and perform at the council chamber. Just to there's one aspect of basically reclaiming the space, and as well because it was very kind of theatre-esque, the old grand kind of in Sheffield Town Hall. But whether that be poets, comedians, shoe designers, singers, but it was just a way to kind of bring and highlight focus of this is a really important meeting. The decisions that take place in these meetings are really, really important, and we should be paying attention. So elected representatives have got a role of responsibility. The civil servants that work in the town halls and city halls around the country have got a role of responsibility to play. But us as ordinary citizens have also got a role to play, just engaging in whatever capacities that you can to basically pay attention. And I think just by virtue of being engaged and paying attention, you'll see how shit things are, what needs changing. But the first step is to basically just engage and just see what's happening. But at the same time, we need to give people a reason to kind of just to make it as accessible for people as possible at the same time. So everybody needs to do their bit. And it's good to see Jennifer doing her bit, Jackie doing her bit. We're all doing our bit.
You doing your very big bit. Thank you both so much for your time, and thank you to those of you who joined us tonight for this wonderful conversation. And I feel a campaign for some sanctions with Bite coming out of this evening. Thanks so much.
This podcast was brought to you by the think tank Compassion in Politics. Our podcasts are part of the Real Agenda Network, and they're recorded live. If you'd like to join us for a live event or receive news about other events and what we get up to at Compassion in Politics, please just go to our website, compassioninpolitics.com, and sign up to our newsletter. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and maybe even review the podcast, and make sure you don't miss any future ones by going to your favourite podcast provider and searching for compassioninpolitics.com. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to being back with you again soon.